Up with part two. No, as you can see, I have erased the board. And so my wife was saying, why do I keep skipping and hopping? Where I start a topic and then I just tell you go study on your own. It's because that's how I was taught. They didn't have all the time in the world. They gave as much as they could in a 1 hour period. And I had to make note of the books, the references, and go search those things to see if they're true. So I'm kind of doing the same thing to you where I'm not going to give you every single thing, but I'm hoping my objective is to inspire you to read and study for yourself. I've learned that from the reformers. Zwingli, Huss, Jerome, Wycliffe, Tyndale, Luther, Miller, all these men, they labored not for people to follow them, but for them to go back to study the scriptures for themselves and have an understanding of truth. So if you see me start a topic and you go, oh man, we didn't even finish it, that's where you finish it. That's why I've given you the references. And I'm just hoping I will inspire you, sow a seed, and one day will click. Now, here's one good way I can tell you that you will start learning to understand and it will connect. Just find one person, just start with one person, especially in the church, that you can share it with in your own words, given your own Bible text. You can even use some of the text that others have used, that I've used. But until you are in a position to start sharing it, your learning capacity is not going to be as versatile until you start sharing it. And I've learned that from the Great Commission in Matthew 28. You ever wondered why Christ told the disciples to go ye therefore and teach? It's because he knows that all good teachers must have a lesson plan. Right? Yeah. All good teachers come to school prepared with a lesson plan to teach their students. When you start teaching it, you're going to realize, oh man, what was that verse again? What was that Bible text? What was that spirit of prophecy reference? And by doing that, you learn it twice. The day you start teaching, you will learn it twice. So, everything else that we didn't cover, I am trusting that you will find the time and you'll go look into it. The only thing I'm gonna iron out though is, am I pressing these things too hard because the points are disappearing?
You got a brand new set.
So from October 22, 1844 onwards, the third angel's message, and when I put AM, it's for angel's message, started to be preached. If you go to early writings, I'm, I want you to take advantage of these books. If you go to early writings, there's a chapter called To the Little Flock. It was a discourse by James White, To the Little Flock that is scattered. After the disappointment, the church was just dispersed. Many were discouraged. They were scattered all over American shores, our waters, or states. So he wrote that to say to the little flock scattered throughout America, right? And James White, no, which is one of our pioneers, married to Ellen White. That's how Harmon became Ellen White, her marital relationship with James White. What he did was he started acknowledging that the people, the Philadelphian church, from 43 leading up to 44, right? So the Philadelphian church was like a 1 year period from 43 to 44. They were very short lived. Immediately after 1844, the church went into that Laodicean mode, neither hot nor cold. All that zeal that they had. So by that one disappointment, a lot of them lost their zeal. It was just not the same. Even though they continued to study their Bible, their zeal in 1844, looking for Christ to come, was not the same after 1844. Then something else happened in this year, 1850. another remarkable thing happened in the Advent movement. So from 40, it was actually from 43, 47 to 50, there about in 1850. Um, this is gonna shock you a little bit. So from after 1844, between 1844 to 1850, they kind of slowed down with public evangelism. They were not out there publicly sharing their faith much because they didn't have their doctrines ironed out. So their doctrine was kind of all over the place, trying to figure out what they believe. So in the I think in the autobiography on your app, you'll see something called the formative years. It's from 1847 to 1850. It's where when they were trying to iron out their doctrine, they stopped doing public evangelism. And people were shocked that our church reached a point where they were so trying to figure out their doctrine that they didn't find the time to go and win other people with their message. So after 1850, no, they started having the whole commandments figured out. They understood the most holy place. Then Ellen White had to rebuke a number of people who was still set in a time when Jesus would come. So fanaticism came in. You had some heretics, extremists. A lot of stuff happened during those formative years, right? So in 1850, the church was more organized in terms of what they believed in. And they put all of that message together and they started, sharing it with the rest of the world. Then later on, we know 1863, right? That's when they got the name, but they were already established from 1850, right? So they got this Seventh-day Adventist name. Go ahead.
It's just interesting, like, leading to 63, there was a lot of fights because, remember, the movement was formed because they came out of Babylon.
Right.
Okay. And so they did not want to be formed, that like organized, because they think that they're gonna be forming another Babylon.
Yeah, they had a fear
in
that,
history, yeah.
very good. They had a fear that being organized as a church, like how the Methodist was organized, the Presbyterian, the Baptist, that they would become Babylon and they would have to have another coming out. So she wrote, and the name Seventh day Adventist was divinely given to the movement, right? They had a list of names they were going to choose from, but the Ellen White, being their prophet, she confirmed the name Seventh day Adventist because they believe the Sabbath commandment, the seventh day, and they believe the second coming of Christ. So they're called Seventh day Adventists, right? So by the time you get into 1863, right, and I have a little study that I did. One day I'm going to share it with you. It's a historical study of the church in 2 years. In 1 year, sorry. 1843 and 1844. They were having some remarkable experiences that in the early 19, because what year did Ellen White die?
1911. 1911.
Sure?
Yeah.
You sure?
1911.
You're guessing. She's not sure.
1911.
Okay. So, getting close to the early 1900s, right? She started reflecting back on these years. She referred back to the marriages back then. She referred to the preaching style back then. She referred to house to house visitation. Like, she just constantly kept reflecting back to what was going on in 1843 and 44. I'll give you one example. She was at a church and she heard.
1915.
Okay.
19 what? 15.
Right? So in 1915 she died. In 1902, 1903, early 1900, the church reached a point where it's so that just like a lot of apostasy came up, was happening. And it took place not just in the local churches, but from the general conference level. Right? You had the Battle Creek burnt down, publishing house burnt down, Kellogg apostatizing. Who else? You had, what's the name of the Santori guy who started spreading a lot of false theory? He was connected with the Santori.
Crozier?
Crozier, right? And a lot of these other men. So a lot of people, maybe that's why people are a little timid with the Santori today, because it's one of the topics on which a lot of the older men who started leading out in the church began to apostatize. So interesting. Same doctrine.
Apostatizing, they lying or they
Yeah,
twisting
they started having some false doctrine. Some of them, Ellen White wrote to them to counsel them to change their ways, but they continued. Kellogg, when it comes to health, Kellogg really, God was using Kellogg to bring across health from an Adventist perspective that blew the world away. She got a vision of Kellogg when he was doing surgery. She said she saw in vision where there were angels guiding Kellogg's hand while he operated on people. On the internet, I think my wife was watching a documentary here in America, and I think one of the president went to Battle Creek.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
like
then
it was known.
Rothschild, one of the richest guys, he was treated in Battle.
Yeah, and Battle Creek was a sanitarium where it's like Adventists had this thing about health that captured the world's attention. It was going on in Battle Creek, Michigan.
Battle Creek was
Is that
for,
Battle Creek, Michigan? That's it. Yeah, 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 Battle
it
Creek.
was for Seventh Day Adventists?
Huh?
Is it for Seventh Day Adventists?
Yeah, yes, it was our hospital today. That was our hospital's
little
in
sanitariums all
yeah,
over.
sanitarium. And they were using the 8 laws of health.
Yeah,
You know.
and then they wanted to be like the world, and they wanted, so they threw away what we had, what the Lord said to do, the little sanitariums, and they wanted the big hospitals and recognition of the world,
Right.
Loma and all of that, and so
Right.
they're far away from God's original plan.
Yeah, and nursing was not even a profession back then. You had physicians, but you didn't really have nurse. So the physician would have these little people with them, they call them like medical missionaries, and they would go. They actually went door to door. Then later on, we have like Frizzy from Wildwood who established that school down south. That's where I got my medical missionary training. So essentially, in one of she went to a church early 1900. She was at this church and she heard an elder preach, and she said the elders preaching remind her of how they used to preach in 1843 and 44. And she said the elder dwelt mainly on the books of Daniel and Revelation. He explained the prophecies one verse at a time. He explained scripture with scripture, and she said he hardly used his own words. And I'm like, whoa. Man, like, I'm struggling to do those kind of sermons. It's so easy to put your own words in a sermon, but back then when they were preaching here, it was text upon text after text. And you see that in the pioneers' writing. That's why Haskell's Cross and the Shadow has so much Bible text. Because they're coming out of the Philadelphian church that built their arguments solely on what the Bible says. I'll give you one quick history. Education system was another thing. So as they're coming out of these apostate thing and the moral church, the churches in America became Babylon and people walked away. By the time they got organized, 1850 leading up to 1863, they got the formal name Seventh-day Adventists and so on. They saw their young people and they wanted to protect their young people. So what they did was they established schools. They established their own schools to protect their young people. So their young people didn't have to go to a secular school to get an education. So the schools was primarily based on equipping the young people from the church to give the first, second, and third angels message. So if you take the book Education as an example, and you go to, there's a chapter in there, the very first sentence says, no education is complete without dress reform. And you're like, what?
What?
Exactly. But when you go to these schools, which in Jamaica they had one, it's called West Indies College. It's where females on one side, males on one side. They didn't allow them to intermingle.
Here too.
And they had the certain way that they would dress and carry on. So all the things that they believed in, they put it in the education system. I'll give you one more shocker. How many of you ever seen the book Counsels on Diets and Foods? Do you know why that book was compiled? It's right there in the preface. Never read it, right? Because we just usually go in the book. Who reads the preface?
I read the preface.
You
but I
did,
forgot.
but you missed that one. Okay. So the book Counsels on Diets and Foods was compiled to be a textbook at Loma Linda University for dietetic students. Yeah.
That was the first Ellen G. White book that was given to me. I was like 15 years old. And
It's a
I,
compliment.
14 or 15, I was reading it, and when I would read stuff like, you can't have cheese, should never, you
Enter
can't
the
have cheese,
stomach.
and vinegar should never enter the stomach. And I was like,
Cinnamon.
I'm giving away meat, and I was like, I can't have mayonnaise, I was like, oh Lord, it's too much. And I put that book aside and never looked at it for many years until now. I was like, let me just do one thing, okay?
Exactly. Right?
But I wish I had struggled. I wish I had, because now I would have it together. But if I had struggled then, now I have to struggle now.
Yeah. So, so when you get into the book Counsels on Diets and Foods, it looks so aggressive, but it was one of the textbooks to teach our dietitians how they're gonna function in the professional world. Which you go through Counsels on Diets and Foods, it is the Adventist health message that we're gonna go and give to them. Yeah. There's some others that was compiled, and when you look through the preface, there was some they were requested from the Ellen White estate. It's the place where the books are compiled. Some of them were like supposed to be textbook for the theologian department or the religion department. So a lot of compilation was designed to be used in our school. So here we go, right? We have these schools, they were not independent of what the church believed. So you went to an Adventist school, it was carrying out the mandate of what the church believes. It wasn't just a place to get a degree, go get a 9 to 5, have pension, mortgage, bills, kids, family, car, it was way more than that. So if you're ever reading the book Education, or you're going through a number of her books that deals with like counsels to teachers and writers and editors, and you see certain things about our teachers should know the first, second, and third angels mystery, or they should know the prophecy. It's because the school and the church were partnered together to bring the Advent message to the world. In those days, one of the first I see your faces. So one of the first young people that they really trained was J.N. Andrews. They built Andrews University off the guy, his name. Yeah, J.N. Andrews, first missionary
White's
overseas.
the White's sons.
The
'Cause
sons
they
of
had
the
Bell.
Whites.
I used to think, when I heard of Andrews first, I thought it was up there with Princeton and Stanford, and still do.
Yeah, so my point is though that
It's
the
a
history
strong
is rich,
missionary.
and Sister Marilyn, I'm like you. I wasn't born in this thing. I'm new, and when I found out and started reading the history, I'm like, this church is packed with history. Go ahead.
No, Andrews was actually named Emmanuel Missionary College.
Oh, there,
because
yes.
it was supposed to train them.
Thank you for pointing that out.
To train the students. Like for example, if you're taking business, they taught it in such a way that you're gonna be a missionary businessman.
Yeah.
Or if you're a nurse, then you're gonna be a
Businessman.
nurse. Like everything was like mission,
I
mission,
want to be a
mission,
missionary
mission.
businessman. How do you
Well, start reading on your own. So here's the thing now for part two, because I'm looking at the clock and I know I'm not gonna finish, so I'm not gonna touch it either. But you can keep the handout. Keep the handout, look through it, go through chapter 33 from this textbook. So chapter 33, the Jubilee, I want you to read it and prepare your minds for next week. And I want to continue. Huh?
Next week you're not here.
Oh yeah. So you have 2 weeks to work on it. That's a lot of time.
Which textbook?
The cross and its shadow. Yeah, chapter 33,
I was
the
blessed
Jubilee.
to find that at a rummage sale that they had, and I said, crossing anything, I'm supposed to pick it up, so that's.
Right.
Thanks the Lord.
Alright, so we have 30 minutes, and I want to iron out. Let me finish this off and do justice to it, right? So, since 1844, we're called to give the third angel's message. But we're still repeating the first and the second. So when we get into the first angel's message now, we give it to the rest of the Protestant world for them to come and accept the Sabbath. Because the first angel's message calls the world back to true worship. That's the purpose of that message. That's the first angel's message. Now, the second angel's message talks about the consequence of the organized religious world that does not accept the first angel's message. They become Babylon. So in the summer of 1842, 43, when the churches in America rejected the first angel's message, they became Babylon, and so people left those fallen churches to join with the Millerites to give the first angel's message.
Isn't it different? The first angel's message then, what was it? It was Jesus is coming, but now it's keep the Sabbath. Is that what you're saying?
No. All right. So when they first preached the first angel's message, right? It was their main focus was the hour of his judgment. That was the point that they emphasized. The hour of the investigative judgment has come. So that is why when you go to the book The Great Controversy, Ellen White there has a chapter called The Investigative Judgment, and I think we can read some of that to close off our study for this afternoon. Go to Great Controversy and find the chapter called The Investigative Judgment. Yeah, next week I'm going to be preaching in a church in Loma Linda for the whole day. We're scheduled for the morning right up to the afternoon. So pray for us. We'll be back in the week after next.
So we won't be here next
Hey, the study continues. I went out of town before, and Art Elliot will be in the gap. All right, so find the chapter with me.
Where's it from again?
The investigative judgment, and then we'll iron that out. I think it's facing life's record. Yeah. If you don't
Life's Record,
facing life's record.
chapter 28.
Yeah. They changed the title here. But in some version it's called the investigative judgment. Facing life's record.
256.
Yeah. So this is as a result of so as I told you, after 1850 they ironed out their message. And the Great Controversy is one of those books that shows you the increase of light that they got. So you go through the Great Controversy, you will find chapters like in the Holy of Holies, right? What is a sanctuary? Prophecies fulfilled. There is one chapter, in Prophecies Fulfilled. I would really encourage you to read that chapter in the Great Controversy, Prophecies Fulfilled, because it tells you the condition of the whole Protestant world in America before 1844. So it will tell you that even amongst the Catholic Church, a lot of people were not taking the Mass anymore. They were not coming to the Mass. There was a big declension of religious behavior in America. And that's why that confirms the second angel's message when they became Babylon. It wasn't just Methodists had issues. The entire people at that point in the United States of America, it's like they lost religious interest. They became careless and indifferent. So she pulled together a lot from some of their leaders. And one of them I remember reading was what one Catholic priest said. He's like, a lot of people don't even come and take the Mass anymore. They declined. Right? So by the time you get to after 1844, now we merge into the Laodicean church. Now, usually, we just talk about Laodicea from a negative standpoint, but there's a lot of positive to it. It's in the name itself. Laodicea. Did I spell that right, Rim?
Not long
There's an I. I stick the I in there last minute. Laodicea?
enough.
No?
Anyway, never mind.
No, tell me.
What church number was that?
It's the seventh church. Revelation chapter 3. CEA?
Yes.
LODE? LOA?
Laodicea.
Spell it?
Laodicea.
Spell it.
No. Phonetic issue. Laodicea.
He's gonna erase
Laodicea.
Okay. So when you look up Laodicea or Laodicea, apart from being lukewarm, Laodicea also means judging people. The judging people. These are the people who bring out the sanctuary message of Christ doing that work of judgment in the most holy place. Right? The judging people. So it's not just being lukewarm. And then I've done a word search on this in the sphere of prophecy, and I realized that Laodicea is not just connected to the Seventh Day Adventist Church, but it's connected to the entire Protestant world. Especially the term rich and increase with goods and have need of nothing. It's applicable to all the Protestant world because a Jehovah's Witness will tell you that he doesn't need the Sabbath commandment. He is rich and increase with goods and have need of nothing. Mormons will tell you the same thing. The who else?
Muslim.
Muslims. All religions come under the category of Laodicea when it comes to the lukewarm and the rich and increase with goods. It's not just Adventism. And that's when I took this word and I put it in my Ellen White software and I was just blown away by the things she had to say about it. And I was like, it's a word and a term for the entire Protestant world, but it's just us Adventists who walk around, oh, Laodicea, Laodicea, Laodicea.
But we usually point, well.
But it's for
we
the
don't wanna
entire
be them
Protestant
because we're always
world.
thinking about it as negative. We don't wanna be a part of it. We don't wanna be lukewarm.
Yeah. But, and then she gets into the message given to them and she says it's a strong message that tells them repent, be zealous and repent, or else I will come and remove your candlesticks. I have the white raiment, buy of me gold tried in the fire that you may be rich, and eye salve that you may see, right? It's not just for Adventism, it's for the whole Protestant world. Because a Baptist member will feel like they're clothed and they're fine. Just like how Adam and Eve, after sin, went and put on the fig leaves and they stopped hiding from each other. But when Christ comes, right? Because when you look at Laodicea, the message to them is really strong, but it's for them to look away from themselves, look away from your religious beliefs and practices, and analyze what Christ thinks about you. It's not just Adventists that has that issue. Because usually when we say we're rich, we're like, well, we have schools, we have hospitals, we have clinic, we're fast grown, we're all over the world. But so is the other churches too. They have something that they would deem that makes them rich and increase with
I
goods.
think it typically describes the whole world per se, because we increase in so much knowledge and stuff that we think we don't need Christ or anything else.
Right.
So it pertains to the whole general atmosphere.
Right. So before you ask your question, I have a little, I'm gonna rock your mind a little bit, but I'll give you enough to go and search these things to see if they're true. What are the three things that Laodicea needs?
To make a choice.
I solve, right? Oh man, did I just spell I
Yeah.
like that? Alright. What else? Gold,
Try the fire.
and what else? White raiment, right? I don't take credit for this, but I was somewhere and I found a presentation and I shared it in the Philippines. Did you know that what Laodicea really need is, you ready for it?
Ellen G. White?
Yep. Ellen Gold Harmon White. Yep. White Raymond. She got married to James White. The gold. She was Ellen Gold Harmon, right? And you look into it, you'll find Esau, the gold, and the white raiment. It's the last prophet that God gave to reform the church.
The last
And
one.
and the last prophet that this world will ever see is Ellen
Some people
Gold
think
Harmon.
that there's plenty.
And there won't be any more. Because just as she was dying in 1915, they asked her the question, hey, should we look for another prophet? And you know what she did? She pointed to the Bible and her writings, and she says, this is enough for the rest of the journey. Yeah. Then she prophesies and she says, the very last deception of Satan is to make of no effect the testimony of the spirit of prophecy. She says Adventists who give up their faith will first give up their confidence in her writings. And then later on, they disregard the Bible. Because you have a lot of people go, oh, well, we only need the Bible, sola scriptura. But she says, once you give up confidence in the spirit of prophecy, next you're going to reject the Bible as well. Because the Bible is what tells you in Revelation 19 that here are those who keep, Revelation 14, verse 12. Here are the patience of the saints, those who keep the commandments of God and have the faith of Jesus Christ. Revelation asks, what is the faith of Jesus Christ? It's the spirit of prophecy. And then in Revelation 19, if I'm quoting it correctly, it says that, and the dragon was wroth with the woman and went to make war with the remnant of her seed, those who keep the commandments of God, and they have the spirit of prophecy. So the last church that Satan is fighting with is Seventh-day Adventism, the Seventh-day Adventist church.
I thought the spirit of prophecy was Jesus.
No, the spirit of prophecy is Christ. We know is the one who speaks through patriarchs and prophets. But you have to find a church in the last days that embraces the Bible, and they have this prophetic gift that was given through Ellen White.
The woman's offspring.
But as I said, dig into it and correct me if I'm wrong. Yes.
Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, it's all right.
Sorry if I cut you off.
No, it's all
You
right.
did.
No, that was good. I'll comment.
I just
Yeah.
wanted to say that the woman's offspring
Mhm.
is the woman that represents Israel is Jacob. Jacob represents Israel. So that is his offspring. He represents those 12 tribes, the 12 stars on the garland.
Mhm.
And so Israel is, we think of, like, we think automatically of the location, Israel, the country. America now, this is the promised land, the Israelites we are Israel, America. So I wanted to say that the offspring of that the dragon is what does it say, that he goes after the offspring of the woman?
He went to make war with the
Yeah.
remnant of her seed, which keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus.
Yeah.
So again, to understand that, we would take the rules we learned and we would let the Bible be its own expositor. We know dragon would be Satan, woman would be a church, and then when you deal with the seed, one text will tell you in the Bible that seed is counted as a generation. Right? So there's a generation of believers that Satan is trying to fight against. So when I looked into this, as I said, I don't take credit for it. Someone shared it, and I went to study it out myself, and I realized that there's a strong connection between the spirit of prophecy, because believe it or not, in Adventism, we are kind of divided here. There's some Adventists, if you ever put writings of Ellen White, you're in trouble. Especially certain subjects. You get into certain thing in there's Adventist churches, you cannot go there and just say Ellen White says, you get in trouble. In the Adventist theological circle, they don't really use her writings as a source of truth, except if you're doing like gift of prophecy to show. So it's like gift of prophecy is designed to teach you that she's a true prophet, but when you get into the deep theological subjects, you got to look at Spurgeon and the other theologians, not so much Ellen White's writings. My professors wrote books that you could tell it's like it's competing a little with Desire of Ages, like the life and teachings of Christ. Rather than use Desire of Ages, we have, which it's the education system that did that, because the education system today has a timeline of how old a book can be that you can use, right? So there are certain age book that you cannot use, which that automatically throws Ellen White stuff out of our accredited schools. Because if you use Ellen White's book, like you take Last Day Events, which was, Counsels and Diets and Foods to teach dietetic students at Loma Linda, you're gonna have problem with accreditation requirement because if you didn't know this, in order for your school to be accredited to give degrees, there's guidelines, and one of them is you cannot use a certain kind of book that was written a certain time. So all your textbook need to be from this year to this year. Anything earlier, it's disregarded, which takes out, you couldn't use Counsels and Diets and Foods now to teach dietetic students at Loma Linda anymore because of accreditation rules. So I see your hand, Sister Marilyn.
Oh, thank you.
So when you get into the education system now of Adventism and you read Christian studies like this guy here or the Broken Blueprint, they will show you what happened when Adventists came together to decide if they're gonna accredit their schools or have the schools accredited. It was a big thing. And when they accepted accreditation, they didn't know the long term effects of what it was going to have on our theology and our doctrine. So today you find like pastors can go, they can get their MDiv, Master of Divinity, in a non Adventist school and come back and serve as an Adventist pastor. Before, in this time period, that was a big no no.
Yeah.
But because of accreditation is different today, you can do that.
You have to do that to be a doctor.
Right. So you look at professors now, the professors in our school, most of them they have their PhD, right? And they had to write a thesis, and some of them will write books. So what they do now is, because of the accredited rule where you need to have books of a certain lifespan, then what happens now is the theologians with the PhD that wrote a book, his book now becomes the textbook for the class. So you couldn't use Great Controversy for a school or Uriah Smith on Daniel and Revelation or Stephen Haskell. Those are too old. But you can use like Ranko Stefanovic that talks about the Revelation, or you can use maybe Maxwell. You could use his stuff. And when you go through what they have written, it's completely different from what the Great Controversy or early writings or last events would talk about. Go ahead, Sister Mary.
Oh, well, it was, I was just raising my hand, after I said that about, Jacob and Israel and the woman, and I wanted to just add to that. That's why in the Bible it refers to, being a time of Jacob's trouble.
Hmm.
You know that verse?
Yes.
Yeah,
Daniel chapter 12, verse 1 and 2.
yeah.
And at that time shall Michael stand up for his people, the prince will stand up for his people, and there shall be a time of trouble such as never was even before there was a nation. So I'm trying to memorize my scriptures. Right? So basically, go ahead.
We had some tapes that were talking about the wicked right arm, and just like we were saying, our church apostasy in certain ways, and like going with what the world says with the medical, also with the education. One person, I wish I remember who it was, but someone popular, not Adventist, loves our book, Education. They said everybody followed that. It gave good counsel on even business and stuff, education. But for for all that we've done, just like you said, to be accredited, now, I've heard, I can't say who, whatever, but current students going to some of our schools like PUC, the student, maybe it's not broadcast, but the students are hearing from teachers that believe in evolution, they
Yeah,
do.
Big
Or they
Bang
believe
Theory.
in alternative lifestyles.
Yeah.
We're like, that's in our church school?
Yeah.
But, and they're saying that they have to, did you say that, let so many people that are not Adventists teach or something, just
Yeah.
for whatever?
Yeah, because when it comes to accreditation, it no longer has the stamp like what we put on it decades ago here. We're operating on a different education system now. So like the college that I went to, it's called College of Health Evangelism that Frizzy, based on this history, established a school like what was going on in Battle Creek to train medical missionaries. It's not accredited. So they can still you should see my textbook. It's Bible and Spirit of Prophecy. I think I have one or two here. Yeah. So here's three samples of the textbook that I used. Like one of them is Ministry of Healing, right? This is a textbook that we use. Lifestyle Physiology. It's Bible text, Spirit of Prophecy with a little science. And this one was Keys to Optimal Health and Happiness. So it's just compilation. We did like Christian education. True education was a class that I took. And because it's not accredited, they can still teach you this and get into what we believe back in Kellogg's days and so on. But if they needed accreditation, they would have to throw out these old stuff and start using the new updated. Then they would have to get a different staff because I remember one of my teachers was a drug addict. Someone gave him Bible study, he became an Adventist. He has no degree in education. So if they became accredited, he couldn't teach. As passionate as he is, he could not teach because accreditation requirements, right? So there's something I want you to, if you ever want more info on it.
The point I was trying to make is the church gets in trouble when they care more about the world, what the world wants, and how we look in the world. If we would just be concerned with doing what God said, then we would be doing that. But when we go trying to impress everybody else and gotta have their doctorate degree, that's how the enemy comes in. Even with our hospitals, say we wanna use Medi-Cal or whatever, or have money or BEOG for our schools. We have to let so many non-Adventists in or work and things get changed against the way God said to do things.
Right. When you have time, source this. It's called the Branson Report. It's when the leading men of our church sat down and come together to decide the future of the Adventist education system. Get a copy of the broken blueprint as well, and you will see that when our education system was infiltrated, a lot of stuff changed. Because now our young people are educated like the world, so they go out, they get that education, and they come back into the church. And unfortunately, some come back as atheists. They don't really believe in God anymore. They're more banking on evolution and science, and stuff happens because the Adventist education system today is way different from what was established. And it all started in this meeting. It's called the Branson
I
Report.
would really recommend that book.
Yeah, the
That
Broken
book-
Blueprint. Arthur has
That
gone
opened
through it.
my eyes
Yeah.
so much to a lot of the.
So how are we
History.
coming out of her,
History.
my people, if our institution is doing it?
So okay, very good. So here's the thing now, right? Here's the catch now. Where before we get to the coming of Christ, this is where this guy comes in. Alright, preparation for the final crisis. In chapter, I'm gonna tell you the chapter here. If you ever can get your hand on it, chapter 4. It's called the shaking. There's gonna be a shaking in Adventism, and those who are in here based on talents, they're gonna leave. She said many bright light will go dim. So the whole system will be reformed and revived. but it's not going to really be like how you would imagine it, but it's going to take place. A reformation of primitive godliness is going to come back, and that's why I'm still a Seventh-day Adventist today. Because the system itself will collapse at the Sunday law, but before that, small companies of believers will stand true to the commandments and what we believe as a people. And when the as Samuel Pippin has a quote, to stand in defense of truth and righteousness when the majority forsake us, this will be our test.
I read that last night.
To fight the battles of the Lord when champions are few, we should get courage from their cowardice and loyalty from their treason. This will be our test.
Is that in the Bible where it says the spirit of prophecy, many will turn against or not take heed to the spirit of prophecy?
All right, so when you go to Revelation, let me see if I can go there.
So it is in the Bible?
Yeah,
That
there's
we're rejecting her writings?
whatever. No, it's okay. So in order to the first thing we would do is you go back to all the prophets before Ellen White
Yes.
and look at their relationship between their message and how their message affected Israel.
True.
Second Chronicles chapter 20 with Jehoshaphat, he says, believe in the Lord your God, believe in his prophets, so shall he prosper. So there was a strong emphasis on if the prophet is from God and they have a message and Israel rejects the message, Israel is in trouble, or God's people is in trouble. So from that perspective, first thing we got to do is figure out, was Ellen White a true prophet? That's where we started. Line her up with all the other biblical prophets. And if she's a true prophet, then whatever message God gives to her, then it's for the church.
So how do you look or separate her prophetess inspiration from some of her opinions?
Okay, so in her writing, she states it there clearly. Paul also did the same thing. He says, I speak as a free man. Remember that? There's one of Paul's verse. He's writing.
He's talking
And
about
it's,
single and married.
yeah, and he goes, I'm speaking as a free man here. And he even went to the point that I have received no counsel from the Lord. I speak as a free man. So the Bible authors did that. Ellen White also did that. She said when it was decision for like buying property and certain things, she was not speaking prophetically as a prophet. She was just giving her 2 cents at her opinion. So she did put that in her writing.
So her spirit of prophecy is good to read, or it sheds light, but there's some of her written books that are her opinion.
Yes, some of the stuff. Yes, some of the stuff she wrote, and she outlines it there. If I have your email, I can give you a soft copy of one of the course we had to take. Was Reen, what was it? Spiritual gift of prophecy? Was it gift of prophecy or gift? The
Spiritual gifts.
spiritual gifts, right? It's one of the course where they put all the medical reports together, all the historical thing and everything surrounding her life. This morning I was searching in preparation for this. I was searching through my Ellen White software and I found the sermon that the guy did at her funeral. It was amazing. At one point he goes, hey, I think if she was alive today, she would say this and she would say that. He was quoting a lot of Bible texts. And I was just reading through the sermon that was preached at her funeral, and essentially they were saying they haven't seen anyone live up to the information that they shared. One last thing I want to share on this is say you're struggling with the health message, all right? Let's be honest. You're struggling with the thing. I would encourage you to go to her writings and you will realize that her family, it took them years to give up the eating of flesh.
Okay.
Yeah. She struggled with the health message. You will find her, like I have it, I have a PowerPoint, I put all the posts together. It's I call it roots. It's to show to like in places where I cannot boldly say Ellen White says, to break down the prejudice, I show them that the fact that Ellen White herself struggled for years with the health message, it clearly means the message came from God and it was not from her. Because she struggled with what God was asking her to do and give. So she had to give the message, but she and her family. So you'll find her saying in this particular year, she's like, stomach, no more meat, promise. And then 2 years later, the cook cannot cook and they're eating meat. Or they're destitute and they're eating duck. And then she like, okay, promise this time, no more. And then a couple of years later, she was fluctuating until she finally got the victory. So I usually share that with people to say, hey, it's the way, because some people think that Ellen White was this perfect human being that just laid down these principles, and it hurts us, it rubs us hard, right? But you search through her life, she struggled with a lot of things that God gave her.
And do we know that she was listed, I think, in the 100 very important people of the century or something? Everybody know who Larry King is, right? He said a lot of stuff, I guess, but he said, if you don't know who Ellen Gorman White is, get to know her.
Wow.
So even, yes,
Who what?
Larry King.
Yeah, Larry
Oh,
King,
anyway,
who did
Ellen G.
the
White. He was talking about
TV
her.
program thing,
Yeah,
right?
Peter Keith.
So yeah, the other thing too, why the pioneers, if you guys don't know, you might be asking, so why did the pioneers who really were diligent student of the Bible, like Sister Marilyn is here, I show the history out there. Our pioneers were men who would spend all night studying the scriptures to lay the foundation of our message. You go through the book like Selected Messages, Book 2 and Book 3, it gives you a history of how we started out. She will give you the names, Bates, Smith, White, all the different guys who helped to build the foundation. She said that oftentimes they would spend the entire night digging the Bible. So as they were searching the Bible for truth, sometimes in the Bible study, they would reach a point where they would put the Bible and they go, we cannot understand anymore. And that's when Ellen White would get a vision and clear up the text, and they would saw their work and what Christ was doing. So she said no, that the reason why the pioneers listened to her giving the prophetic gift is because during the Bible study, she said her mind was locked. She couldn't understand what they were studying. So it wasn't until the vision would come and the understanding came through the vision, through her, that they would say, well, she wasn't saying anything during the whole study. And she said that was one of the sad part of her life because she couldn't keep up with the Bible study. But as soon as the vision came, light would be shed on their pathway and they embraced her as a true prophet. So her thing was not like, and then we see her educational background. She what
Got hit in the head when she was
hit in the head at 9 years old, and then later, so she didn't get like a formal education or anything. She was just
like
rough
third
cut,
grade.
you know. So that's one thing she shared as well. So in here, Sister Joanne, when you deal with the spirit of prophecy, it's the voice of Christ to the churches. So Christ picked her out in the last days, and it has to go with the Bible because all the other prophets we see agreed with the scripture. So when she came on the scene, she couldn't come and teach anything different. Here's a little giveaway for you guys too. Just scan through the whole world and you will realize in every religion there is a prophet. Every single religion has a prophet. Buddhism, Buddha. Muslim, Muhammad, all of them. In the Hinduism, Vishnu, and all these people. And then when you come into the Protestant world, they also have their prophet. A Jehovah's Witness knock on your door, who is their prophet?
James
Smith, right? A Mormon knocks on your door, who is their prophet?
No,
Mormons is Smith.
Yeah, yeah.
Who is the Jehovah's Witness?
You know, the kids that came.
Dig into it. They all have a prophet. But here's the thing. So when you become a Mormon, as an example, who had their hand up? I think.
Oh, I did. I was just going to say in the book of Proverbs, there's a verse that says that the eyes of God is in every room.
Right. So when you look at, like, if a Mormon knocks on your door, they don't hide their prophet in their back pocket and just give you their Bible, right? They tell you here, hey, the prophet says this, the prophet says that. So here's the thing now. As Adventists, we kind of tuck Ellen White to the side and we tell people that this is all we believe in. And then after they're baptized, we try to push this down their throat.
No, we should tell
It's
them that
deception.
beforehand.
Apart, when I went to the crusade as a non-Adventist, they first did the first night was about the credibility of the Bible. And then they talk about a world in turmoil and a little bit more, 2, 3 nights, Bible, sermons from the Bible. And then they will tell you, hey, you can't afford to miss Thursday night. We're going to talk about 7 biblical tests of a true prophet. And that sermon is to tell you about Ellen White. Because they know when you become an Adventist, you're going to have to read Counsels and Diets and Foods, Ministry of Healing, Great Controversy, Desire for Ages, Steps of Christ. So when you were baptized, and no, at my baptism, you know one of the questions they asked me? I don't see you guys doing it here, but they asked 13 questions, and one of them is, do you believe that the writings of Ellen G. White is the spirit of prophecy, and do you believe it's the identifying mark of the remnant church, and do you pledge to read it subject to your baptism? And I went like this. That's why I have to talk about it, because I took a vow before I was baptized.
And they used to do that too. We used to do all 13 of them. Now they do like 4, whatever the pastor wants to do.
So, Sister Joanne, that's me from the world, okay? Going to church on Sunday. That is the question I was asked before I was baptized.
Is that one that they still do? I said yes to that.
13 questions. No, I don't see them doing that here.
In
But
recent
in
years, they have stopped. We used to do that, all
yeah,
13 in front of the whole
questions.
church.
Yeah, and you
then
have to raise your
We
hand.
vote them into a membership, but
Yeah.
now the pastor does like 4 of them, maybe. He says, we went over that in my office. And I don't like it. I think that they should have to say it in front of the whole church.
Yeah.
We're voting them into.
So when you became an Adventist, you know, my baptismal, my newly convert gifts was a copy of Steps to Christ. Hey, don't leave, we'll pray. We're gonna close. Steps to Christ
Message them.
and Desire Pages. So how could I say no to reading the books? Because in the crusade, they told me that her writings is the identifying mark of the remnant, and you pledged to do it subject to baptism, and I went like this, went in the pool, came up saying Ellen White says.
Joseph Smith was their prophet, the Mormon.
The Mormon, there you go. Let's have a prayer so we can close out.